I'm Tawfik in New York, and this is BBC World News America. The climate summit is pushed into overtime. With emotions running high, negotiators try to strike a deal on how to combat rising global temperatures. We'll have the latest. With thousands of migrants stranded on the border between Belarus and Poland, we look at the dangers they face, caught in freezing conditions and a burning political row. A grand jury has indicted one of Donald Trump's former top aides. Steve Bannon had refused to cooperate with a congressional committee investigating the January 6th Capitol riots. And a new injection helps paralyzed mice walk again. Could it lead to a breakthrough for humans? We have the story. Welcome to World News America on PBS and around the globe. The UN Climate Summit in Glasgow, known as COP26, has now passed its scheduled finishing time. But delegates and negotiators are continuing to work through the night to try to come to an agreement about what steps the world must take in order to combat climate change. A third draft is being worked on to replace the last one. All the while, hundreds of activists are marching through the summit venue, complaining that the proposed actions don't go far enough. Our environment editor, David Shookman, is in Glasgow and has this report.
A warning from outside the conference about the state of progress inside it. World leaders are singled out for failing to keep their promises, for allowing the planet to become dangerously overheated. Appeals for action came in the conference halls as well. Activists calling on governments not to water down key points in the agreement, a plea echoed by the most vulnerable nations.
Our safety, the safety of my children and yours, hangs in the balance. As I said to the High Ambition Coalition this morning, it's time for us to level up. This will be the decade that determines the rest of human history. We cannot let it slip by.
But some disputes are proving really difficult to settle over coal and what to say about phasing it out. How often countries should update their climate plans, every year to reflect the urgency or less often. And how much climate aid to give the poorest nations, not just now, but over the coming decades. The whole point of these talks is to try to limit the rise in global temperatures, so how's that going? Well, compared to pre-industrial times, we've warmed by at least 1.1 degrees Celsius, and record heat waves are already becoming more frequent. Above 1.5 degrees, many coral reefs are expected to die off, among a long list of other impacts. Now, if everyone here keeps to the promises they've given, a big if, we're still on course for about 1.8. And that means even higher sea levels and even more people threatened by flooding. But being realistic, as things stand, a more likely outcome is 2.4, which means even longer droughts affecting food production across vast areas of the planet.
How are you doing, buddy? Very good to see you.
Thank you. Would you like to sit there? So I asked America's veteran climate envoy John Kerry, would any of this slow down global warming?
So we're moving in the right direction. Are we moving fast enough? No. But that's what this meeting is about. You know, scientists never said, hey, you guys have to have this done by the end of the COP. They said you have 10 years.
Well, they said it was incredibly urgent.
No, yeah, it is incredibly urgent. And that's exactly why 65% of global GDP has said we're going to keep 1.5 degrees alive.
Meanwhile, as haggling continues, the conference chair made another plea for agreement.
Now we need that final injection of that can-do spirit which is present at this COP, so that we get this shared endeavour over the line.
But emotions are running high and many delegations are worried.
So for us, ambition 1.5 is not a statistic. It is a matter of life and death.
Some among us are wasting precious time here in Glasgow, attempting to renegotiate what was already agreed.
So a long night of negotiations lies ahead, and the plan next is to see what's possible tomorrow. David Shookman, BBC News in Glasgow.
Well, the BBC's Christian Fraser is at the venue for us tonight and joins me now. So, Christian, what are the main sticking points, and are people there optimistic that they can get an ambitious final agreement?
Well, as you can see, there are people behind me having their photograph taken behind one of the COP26 podiums. These people all thought it might happen tonight and the gavel might come down on one of those podiums, but no, it's going to probably go into the late hours tomorrow. A new text will be published at breakfast time, a third draft, and you would think, probably politically speaking, they won't want a fourth or a fifth draft, so they will be going around the groups this evening. In fact, we saw John Kerry again in the company of the Chinese envoy, Mr. Xi, walking through the corridors, so those negotiations continuing through the night. But they'll take that draft document to every grouping, then it has to be translated into 6 UN languages, and then they will have a plenary in this room behind me tomorrow, starting at 10 o'clock, to thrash out any outstanding issues that people might have. But the feeling will be, when it comes to the sticking points, which is finance for adaptation as well as mitigation, details on the rules behind the Paris Agreement, the language around coal and fossil fuels, and whether they're going to come back every year to upgrade their ambitions. All those things have to be sorted. You would think, though, when they put that document to the plenary tomorrow, they'll be hoping that the ambition is there and that the number of outstanding voices has shrunk, and maybe they will be railroaded into agreeing it because the room wants the deal. That is certainly the ambition of the COP presidency here. They put out a document on Wednesday. The question mark was, is that the floor or is that the ceiling? And I think with some of the stronger language we've been getting through the day, it was actually the floor, Neda, because it has been improved as we've gone along.
Well, Christian, to that point about the room wanting a deal, I mean, how is the mood different for this COP than past other summits?
Well, we've been showing on the BBC today, reporting from Greenville in California and the damage that's been done to the great sequoias there. We all know what happened in Louisiana and what happened in New York State this year. And the same is true here in Europe, in Germany, the flooding. We've had flooding in China as well. There's been forest fires in Russia. So that's been the backdrop, if you will, to the negotiations here. And veterans of COP summits, this is my first, but veterans who've been here for many years to various summits say there is a very different atmosphere here. And it's largely because at 1.1, as Davey was just saying, we're already seeing the effects of climate change. And so the urgency is there, and I think that will help them get the deal over the line tomorrow.
All right, Christian, we know you'll keep across the latest for us from there. Thank you. Well, as you've been hearing, the climate crisis is no longer a looming threat, but a very present danger. All week, we've been looking at places suffering the worst. Well, it's been a record year of fires in California. Emergency workers there have battled fires covering more than 2.5 million acres of land so far this year. One giant blaze in the north of the state took nearly 3 months to bring under control. Our climate editor, Justin Rolat, reports on the widespread damage caused to livelihoods and the environment.
Meet General Sherman, the biggest individual organism in the world. This giant sequoia is 84 meters tall and it is 2,200 years old.
These trees are restricted to 70 groves on the western slope of the Sierra Nevada.
That's all that's left of the giant sequoia.
Very narrow little patches of just the right remaining habitat.
It is a habitat that has always included fire.
So these trees are exquisitely adapted to cope with fire. Listen to this. The bark is full of tiny air pockets and it's about 1 meter thick, so that insulates it from the heat of the fire. And then if you look up at the canopy, the first branches start about 30 meters up, so they're lifted clear of all but the very biggest fires.
But fire has now become their greatest threat. Years of climate-induced droughts have left vegetation tinder dry. Add in a policy of suppressing small fires, which allowed deadwood to build up, and fires are now ripping through California's forests faster and hotter than ever before.
This is good, low severity fire in here.
General Sherman escaped unsinged. The flames came within 1/4 of a mile of it, but other trees weren't so lucky.
Before 2015, no one saw a sequoia that looked like this. There's nothing I can do about these trees. They're gone, and we will plant new ones, but it takes 1,000 years.
And they won't be this for hundreds.
No, they won't
years.
be this for a long, long time.
And it isn't just trees that are burning, communities are too.
It took all the color out of my life. Look at everything is just a shade of gray.
The entire town of Greenville was razed to the ground in just 2 hours, and Nicole's forever home went with it. But Nicole believes something good could rise from the ashes.
Greenville could actually be a lighthouse community of sustainability and climate adaptation. And how do we live in our new normal? Because big fires are now the new normal.
You can see the crown is totally intact. There's living bark under this char. Look at this.
And in the forest, Christy hasn't given up hope either.
So this is black on the outside. This will all come off and the bark will continue to grow, and this tree is completely fine.
She says the resilience of the trees should inspire us.
We need to act on climate change now, and every little bit counts.
It isn't too late, she says. Not yet. Justin Rolat, BBC News, the Sierra Nevada mountains.
Well, staying here in the United States, one of former President Trump's top aides has been indicted by a federal grand jury on 2 counts of contempt of Congress. Steve Bannon had refused to comply with a summons issued by a congressional committee investigating the breach of the U.S. Capitol on January 6th. Well, for more, I'm joined now by the BBC's North America editor, John Soppel. So, John, what more can you tell us about the charges and what happens next?
Well, the charges have been laid. There have been 2 counts by a federal grand jury of contempt of Congress by Steve Bannon's refusal to appear before the Select Committee investigating what happened on January the 6th. Now, it's no surprise that the committee wanted to speak to Steve Bannon. The day before, on his radio show, he more or less laid out what was going to happen. All hell is going to break loose, he said. Strap in, it's going to be wild, etc., etc. And so the committee wanted to speak to him. He said, I'm not going to appear. They issue a subpoena, he still doesn't appear. And after that standoff, a federal grand jury has now ruled that he must. And it's understood that Steve Bannon will surrender to the authorities on Monday and appear in court possibly Monday afternoon. So it's pretty dramatic. But I think the real significance is not Steve Bannon, it's all the other people who were part of the Trump campaign who chose to kind of follow behind Steve Bannon and say, I'm not going to appear either. How many of them will want to face a federal indictment for contempt of Congress for not appearing?
And John, you know, as you say, it's so many people who have really gone on to follow President Trump on exerting executive privilege. This will be a real test of that, won't it?
Yeah, so you've got on the one side people saying, I was working for the president, I have executive privilege, I don't have to answer your questions. And you have Congress, one of the co-equal branches of government as set up by the US Constitution, saying, oh yes you do. And a federal grand jury has been got brought together. They have looked at the issues and they have said, yes, you do have to appear. And by not appearing, you are in breach of Congress's rules. And therefore, that is an indictable offence. And you could face up to a year in prison if you don't appear. I would imagine a lot of those people who've said, I'm not going anywhere near this committee, are now thinking twice.
All right, John Soppel with the latest there for us. Thanks so much. Now, the humanitarian crisis along the border between Belarus and Poland is worsening as migrants continue to head to the border, only to be caught in a political limbo between the two nations. Alexander Lukashenko, the Belarusian president, is accused of deliberately orchestrating the crisis to challenge sanctions imposed on his country last year, following a crackdown on dissent. Our correspondent Steve Rosenberg is in Belarus and has more.
By day, the scale of this migrant crisis becomes clear. Belarus's border with Poland transformed into a camp for those desperate to get to Europe. Tonight, for the first time, Belarusian border guards agreed to take us into the camp right up to the border. Behind the barbed wire, the European Union, just meters away. Many here are Kurds from the Middle East. The EU believes that Belarus helped them get here, that the country is facilitating illegal migration into Europe, revenge for sanctions. But Poland won't let them in.
We are like a homeless. We don't have any place to stay there. It's about weather, it's too cold. We just collect firing and burning our trees to make our bodies heat. But still we hope, we never give up.
We've been told there are more than 2,000 people in this camp living in pretty basic conditions. This story is a very human drama, but the backdrop, that's geopolitics. The migrant crisis is ratcheting up east-west tension. Near the border, paratroopers from Belarus and Russia held joint exercises, signalling whose side the Kremlin's on. Increasing too is Alexander Lukashenko's rhetoric. This week, he threatened to block the flow of Russian gas to Europe if the EU imposes more sanctions on Belarus. But those who see Belarus as a stepping stone to the EU, they couldn't care less about sanctions or geopolitics. They just want a better future. Many of them have paid thousands of dollars for package tours that bring them to Belarus and deliver them to the border with Europe. But no further. For most, the journey stops here. And so they have to wait in the cold while governments argue, waiting and hoping to be let through. Steve Rosenberg, BBC News, Belarus.
You're watching BBC World News America. Still to come on tonight's program. Demonstrations continue in Iraq against last month's elections. We report from Baghdad, where tensions are rising.
Wallonia, a way of life where creation thrives. Continuously striving for balance in a circular green economy. A land of excellence and achievement, shaping our future. Where expertise drives our world each time further. Wallonia, the land of sustainable innovation.
Climate change is marking our world. We explore the threats and the solutions, so those marks don't become permanent. A season of programs and in-depth coverage throughout the UN Climate Conference COP26 on BBC World News and BBC.com.
Protests continue in Iraq against the country's parliamentary election results. Last week, pro-Iranian groups who lost many of their seats clashed with security forces at the edge of Baghdad's secure green zone. Just a few days later, the country's prime minister survived an assassination attempt after a weaponized drone hit his house. It was hoped that last month's election would move the country forward, but disputes over the results are creating real concerns about a future civil war. Our Middle East correspondent Anna Foster is in Baghdad for us tonight and sent this report.
Waiting for a new government. This protest camp sprang up in the days after the election. It's now home to thousands of pro-Iran militias. They claim corruption was the reason why their party lost so many parliamentary seats. Last Friday, this protest turned violent. 2 men were killed. Kadam insists the ballot was rigged, even though there's no clear evidence. He was injured in the clashes. Is it just because the party you voted for didn't win? Because that's not the same as there being something wrong with the election.
They played with the numbers. I'm a worker, and there is no one paying me to say this.
On the fringes of the camp, military figures stand guard, but these aren't regular soldiers. The Popular Mobilization Forces are a paramilitary group backed by Iran. The lines have long been blurred in Iraq. Warlords are now kingmakers. In Baghdad's infamous Sadr city, the influence of the Shiite cleric Muqtada al-Sadr is everywhere.
These streets saw some of the fiercest battles during the war, and now the man who orchestrated so much of that violence, the man who this whole area is named after, has a crucial position in deciding the future of this country.
His Sadrists won the largest number of seats in the election, which gives him the most bargaining power. But even in his stronghold, optimism is hard to find.
Today, Iraq is not rising up. It's going into the unknown because of our leaders.
October's election was supposed to solve widespread unrest about corruption, unemployment and a crumbling economy. But those with the loudest voices were kidnapped or killed, and many people boycotted the poll. Amira did stand as a candidate, but it wasn't easy. They physically assaulted me and I had to move home 5 times, she told me. I will keep going because if I give up, then many women will also give up. Many people are persevering here, but it'll take Iraq's leaders to really guide this country out of the dark. Anna Foster, BBC News, Baghdad.
Now, a judge in Los Angeles has just terminated the conservatorship of Britney Spears 13 years after it was first put in place. The ruling follows a highly contentious legal battle between the singer and her father, Jamie Spears. He was suspended as her conservator last month, and for years he oversaw his daughter's estate and controlled much of her personal and professional life. Spears spoke out publicly against her conservatorship over the summer, calling it abusive and pleading with the court to end the arrangement. Moving on now, a group of scientists here in the United States may have found a breakthrough treatment for reversing paralysis in humans after successfully testing a new therapy on mice. In a series of experiments, so-called dancing molecules were injected into the spine of the animals, sending a message to the cells to repair themselves. The mice regained the ability to walk within 4 weeks, and it's hoped human trials could begin next year, as Mark Lobel reports.
Spot the difference. This is a mouse before treatment and after. Walking again.
Over the period of about 3 to 4 weeks, we were able to observe that an initially paralyzed mouse, as a result of severe spinal cord injury, regained great ability to walk.
So how did scientists do it? A treatment packed with hundreds of thousands of molecules was injected in the tissue around the spinal cord to repair cells. Crucially, this watery therapy kept everything moving.
We discovered that the motion of the molecules inside this filament is critical in their ability to signal cells in the spinal cord in order to initiate repair.
To trigger the experiment, an incision was made in the mammal's spine. That's to replicate what happens to humans after they suffer a car crash, sports injury, gunshot wound, or from a disease. It's hoped human trials could be approved next year. For now, though, this exciting discovery, a unique assembly of many molecules, may soon offer hope to hundreds of thousands of people living with spinal injuries, with a simple injection in the back, if human testing stands up to scrutiny too. Mark Lobel, BBC News.
And before we go, we leave you with an extraordinary feat. 21-year-old Paralympian Theo Curran has set off on quite a challenge, swimming across one of South America's largest lakes. 10 days, 122 kilometers, all at a freezing 10 degrees Celsius. Well, the Frenchman is a quadruple amputee, and he's joined by 2 other swimmers, all aiming to raise awareness about our environment. We wish them the best of luck on their adventure. Well, remember, you can catch more on our website, and you can check me out on social media. I'm Netta Tawfik. Thanks for watching World News America.
Hello there. We've had flooding rains across the western Mediterranean. In particular, the Balearics have been affected